Every great creative work stands on the shoulders of giants. Welcome to RetroInspection, where we examine and find out where the things we love today came from.
Let me ask this question, because as I invite people to look at your other series called An Evil Mind, you are, if not an expert on the crime detective genre, you are extremely well read. How do you view Fantomas in that arena?
What do you mean, as a just compared to other?
As a crime detective story.
I mean, I suppose it prefigures modern stories some, certainly again in terms of its violence, but you know, if you look at what was around it at the time, he kind of fits right in with these other, you know, larger than life gangster characters that are run around, like Dr. Mabuse, Dr. Nicola, Fu Manchu, like that. So, you know, you got to be a little careful. The arch gangster type and the mad scientist type bleed over a lot into each other. You know, Mabuse and Nicola have something in common with the mad scientist archetype of, say, Fu Manchu. On the other hand, you know, they're both like hypnotists, and you know, Dr. Nicholas probably a vivisectionist, but neither one is building a death ray or some kind of super germ that's going to allow them to take over the world. They have smaller goals. Fantomas is, at least in this novel, and I haven't read further in the series, but he doesn't really appear to have any goals other than short-term acquisition of money, which is like why I think he's, you know, he kills for pleasure, but he, as well as killing for a certain amount of gain. But he doesn't really seem to have big plans other than that, except for like screwing with the cops and shocking the public. He is, you know, he is a serial killer, and like all serial killers, he's also essentially a terrorist. I mean, it's the same kind of a thing. You know, you can kill, you know, dozens of people, or you can set off a bomb at one time, but in terms of upsetting the public, it's the same kind of deal.
Let's talk about Inspector Juve of the Surete.
Yeah.
There are scenes in this book where he is investigating, and his investigation is quite a bit different than what you would expect from, say, Sherlock Holmes. What do you think
he's
about
more.
that?
Oh, well, he's kind of in the instinctual detective vein. He kind of
so more like Dupin or whatever.
Because Dupin, as an antecedent of Sherlock Holmes and the characters contemporary to Sherlock Holmes, were all kind of like, you know, your rational, you know, deductive guys. You know, they're seeing all the little bitty small clues. Juve doesn't do a hell of a lot of that. He's just kind of slogging along. He has more in common with the American hard-boiled type of detective who, you know, wouldn't really show up in the U.S. till about 10 years later. You start seeing something like Grace Williams, and then you get into the 30s, you have all the Black Mask and Dime Detective magazine type characters, you know, and they're forerunners of like Philip Marlowe, who comes along in the 40s. You know, at the end of the 40s, you get Mike Hammer, you know, those kind of guys. So Juve is kind of like that, except for the disguise gimmick. He is a plotter. I was trying to think if there was any kind of relationship really with, like, you know, Maigret, who would come along later in the after the war, but I'm not really seeing it. It was just it was just kind of a notion that popped into my head because we're talking about French detectives.
This, well, I like the character of Juve. I think he's interesting and a little bit cheeky. But as a detective, he's quite lacking. I mean, there's a scene or several chapters in this book where he's presenting a case to prosecute Fantomas, as it were, and even the other character who is the prosecutor or the president of the court has to tell Juve what you're saying is basically intuition and is useless. So in that way, he's quite a bit different than what you would expect, even though he's right about everything.
Yeah, he just can't support it. He doesn't have evidence. He doesn't even have a clear chain of reasoning that people could follow. Because he does have a chance to get Fantomas locked up, while Fantomas isn't one of his guises that he's using to hoodwink everybody, but it comes to nothing. Because
the other thing I think
is a big deal.
The other thing I think connects this to maybe more modern detective stories is that there's quite a bit of not sexual content, but more mature romantic themes in this than I expected to find. And things that you wouldn't even find you would not find in Sherlock Holmes, for instance.
No, but that's by design, because Holmes, Watson. Watson was the romantic character, small R romantic character in that. He's the one that's chasing women. Holmes, with the possible and entirely non-canonical possibility of Irena Adler, evinces like no interest in women whatsoever. He's this gets us into a whole realm of unproductive conjecture. But this book has something of a romantic subplot, but that was also very, very standard for these things at the time, and even going into the 30s and 40s, your protagonist character would usually have to be also dealing with some kind of romantic subplot between like two of the supporting characters. There's always some kind of boy and girl. They're either they can't get along, or they're kept separated by their families, or that kind of doodah. You see that to a certain extent in the first Dr. Mabuk's book. It is absolutely present in the first Dr. Nikolov book, but you'll even see it in things like Charlie Chan novels and Mr. Moto once you get to the 30s. It was considered a convention of that. You couldn't just have a straight-ahead crime novel. You had to have all this, some kind of gooey love story. Hell, for that matter, you get it in the Marx Brothers movies. It's like Night of the Opera. Night of the Opera is a great movie, but I feel like it's hobbled because we keep diverting away from these three lunatics to have to go deal with, the boy and girl mooning over each other. It's like, what the shit? What are we doing here?
Well, I think maybe part of that is that because in this era, books were the be-all and end-all of entertainment. Movies hadn't really hit
live theater.
Well, live theater, right? But even live theater, right? In Shakespeare, even the tragedies had some romance in them, right? So they were giving the audiences a wide variety of things to latch onto and enjoy.
So we had comic relief and romantic relief.
A little bit, because Juve's funny. There's sexual intrigue between Fantomas and Lady Bentham.
Yeah.
Even the kids in the beginning, you didn't know what was going to happen with them. So it has a lot of variety in it, so that you can find things in it to really like. In the end, I enjoyed this book quite a bit. I recommend it. I know that, look, it's tough getting through the first.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's tough getting through the first 4 or 5 chapters, but once you do, you really, there's a lot to enjoy. And it is, looking back at the past, it's quite interesting to see how at that time the French court system worked, and how, the detective work happened in France. I mean, Juve has this incredible machine, the Bertillon machine or something like that, where he measures the strength of various suspects, and from that can deduce who was actually able to commit a certain crime. So those things are interesting.
Like, subscribe, repost, share everywhere. To see what else we're up to, visit xynobooks.com, xenobooks.com.